This is episode 553 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by Carlos Garcia of the Garcia Automotive Group. We'll talk more about your company there, Carlos, but welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're obviously going to talk, given the level of attention we've paid to the governor's electric vehicle mandates on this show, about that and the dealer's perspective on that. But before we dive into the policy issues coming at us today, just let's talk about the Garcia Automotive Group and your involvement in it. You said to me that this company's been around for 80 years. So you're a young guy. You obviously didn't found it. Talk about your role in this whole operation and its history in New Mexico.
Sure. Well, so I think it's actually closer to 90 years we've been in the transportation business in New Mexico, and it started with my grandpa Toby, not to be confused with my brother Toby, who was a dishwasher, and he borrowed $50 from his uncle and bought a truck and took the parts off it and sold the parts, and then went and bought another truck and bought another truck and bought another truck. And so he was in the scrap and truck and salvage business, and he was well established at Rio Grande and I-40. Before I-40 was there, it was called Toby's Truck Parts. And he was a real enterprising guy for someone that had an eighth grade education, and was well liked in the community. He was a political leader too. He was very concerned about getting Hispanics into judgeships and into politics and things like that. And then my dad.
What era were we talking about
So
there?
they started in the 30s.
Okay.
And then my dad was born in 1934, and then he was in that business with my dad, with my grandpa, and then he went to UNM, and so my dad was in that scrap and salvage business too. He was the first non-Jewish president of the National Auto Dismantlers Association, which is a really huge deal. And my dad, my mom always said my dad's idea of an exciting date when they were in college was to drive around Albuquerque and look for used cars for sale. So he sold used cars and trucks off my grandpa's lot, and the Tom Joads of the world heading west on Route 66 was sort of how they built their business. But my dad always knew that he wanted to be a new car dealer to get trade-ins. And so at that time, the big three had over 70% market share. And so he was really trying hard to figure out a way to get in the new car business. And so he ended up with acquiring a Toyota franchise in 1967. And so he was just way ahead of his time. And the first month in business, I think they sold one car, and it was to his uncle. And the other car dealers in town would laugh at him and say, Julian, you still selling those sewing machines? Because Toyota was known for building sewing machines. And my dad, my mom would always said, we knew it was the right thing to do. We knew reliable transportation that was affordable and had good gas mileage. We just knew if we hung in there long enough, we were going to make it, and they were proved right. And so they were real pioneers in import cars and Japanese cars in the 60s. And then they got a Honda franchise, another Toyota, another Honda, and they built a pretty big business. And then I'm one of five siblings, and I work in the business with two of my brothers. And, we've, our parents just gave us such a great legacy in serving our community and doing everything that we possibly can to help our community. I think that's really become the focus for my brother Ed and I now. Is we have a little real estate business, and we're active in a lot of different things right now. So it's a busy time, but we were born here, went to school here, and we just absolutely love New Mexico and Albuquerque in particular. And now we have a bunch of dealerships. The best thing that my mom did was when my brothers wanted to get into the business, she told them that she wasn't going to loan them any money. So there was, they had to find a deal on their own, and failure wasn't an option. So they made it and grew the company, and now we just kind of all operate a lot of different franchises. We're in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and El Paso.
All right. Do you know how many total are involved in that auto group?
Well, we have in Albuquerque, we have Honda, Infiniti, Subaru, Cadillac, Alfa Romeo, and then we have a motorcycle dealership that's Honda, Ducati, and Vespa. And then Santa Fe, we have Mercedes and Volkswagen, and Espanola, we have Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, Ram, and then El Paso, we have Land Rover.
All right. Well, that's a pretty wide spectrum right there. And I'll say that before we ever talked, I bought a Honda from your family about a year and a half ago.
Oh,
So,
awesome! We
yeah,
appreciate the business.
yeah, thanks. But we are here now to discuss what's going on in New Mexico with the electric vehicle mandates that the governor is pushing. Now, uh, I'm sure you already know this, but just to make sure that all of our listeners are on the same page, there is already a EV mandate that the governor has pushed through her Environmental Improvement Board, an appointed, not elected body, to take us to 7% by the next model year. I believe that's 2025. So, sometime around next summer, 7% of the vehicles sold in the state of New Mexico new will be mandated to be electric. That's obviously an issue. I know the Auto Dealers Association was uh, opposed to it, but uh, coming at us and at the Environmental Improvement Board here in November is a far, far more aggressive mandate. 43% by 2027, 82% by 2032, I believe. And Rio Grande Foundation's been out in front of this. And I'm gratified to hear that your family and your network of dealerships is getting active on this issue and has been active as well. So, talk just about electric vehicles as a concept, and then how this regulation will impact your dealership.
Sure. Well, I don't know if the time we have is going to be enough to get all my thoughts, but I'll do my best to be
Sure.
concise. So, just to backtrack to what you were talking about with the 7%. So that's called the Clean Cars Rule, and that was actually just passed by the a similar hearing to what we're having here in a couple weeks. This was only a year and a half ago that the EIB and the Albuquerque Bernalillo County Air Board voted to adopt that Clean Cars One rule, which was the 7%. And we did have some dealers who spoke in, I don't know if I want to say opposition, but there were some definite concerns there. And the president of our dealer association spoke, and I think they did a nice job. I think the big reason why that didn't get a whole lot of attention on the dealer side was, 7% is at least reasonable. So if you told me right now that we were going to stick with that clean cars rule and try to get to 7% here in a couple years, I would say that that's reasonable. But the big thing is it's achievable or close to being achievable, right? So in New Mexico, last year, these numbers are very close, if not 100% accurate. But we sold 60-some thousand new cars in New Mexico in 22, and 3.64% I think they call them ZEVs, so zero emissions vehicles. So it's electric cars and plug-in hybrids, which are included in this, and sort of a misnomer because it's really just geared towards electric cars. But it was like 3.64%, and so far this year to date we're at 4.51 or something, a whopping 4.51%, even with all this attention. So, it seems to me in a couple years getting to 7 with the amount of new models coming out and the availability, I think it'd still be hard to get to 7% because there's just no demand for electric cars now, but it at least seemed reasonable. And I think that's probably why there wasn't a whole lot of dealers freaking out over it. And our manufacturers at the time were also giving us, huge numbers of electric, or I shouldn't say huge numbers of production, but their product planning was talking a lot about all the EV models that they were going to be bringing out. So if you look at the whole portfolio from all the manufacturers, and our business for 80 some years is geared to meeting the transportation needs of New Mexico, whether it's a $20,000 car or a $250,000 car. We want people to feel comfortable trading with us, and by trading I mean doing business. And our job is to find them what they're looking for that's safe and reliable, meets their needs, protect their family, work in their budget. That's what we do every day. That's what our 258 employees do every day, is to try to help people, and that's what we want to preserve. People should be able to spend money however they want to and not be told what to drive. But that's another topic. But the 7% I think was a reasonable number.
Mm-hmm.
So now fast forward within 18 months, and so the feeling, or at least the I guess the feeling of the dealers that had attended those hearings in 22 in May was that we were going to do this, and at the same exact time, California was bringing up their Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule, which was going to sunset the rule that New Mexico was actually adopting. And it was brought up that we were going to, should we look at what California was doing? And so California then came out with Advanced Clean Cars 2, which is really drastic, and basically you've touched on it on the podcast before, but for us, the number in New Mexico is 43% zero emission vehicle retail sales have to be 43% of them have to be zero emissions vehicles by 2027, which is just it's an unobtainable, totally unfeasible number by any stretch. California, there's no way they're going to hit it. I think they're at 19% now. And the cars are just sitting and sitting and sitting, even with the huge incentives that California has. So, basically and I'll let you ask more detailed questions, but my thing is, I just don't see what we have in common with California. They're a very rich state. We're a very poor state. Their average driver drives 12,000 miles a year, and they have a ton of huge cities. We have one medium-sized city. Average driver in New Mexico is 19,000 miles a year. Our income's drastically less than California. They have a 10-year plus head start on us on infrastructure. They have put hundreds of millions of dollars in incentives for people to buy EVs. We have zero incentives here. I mean, even Colorado, who's going to adopt this same thing, their average income's more than California, which I didn't know, and they have state incentives. So, comparing us to California, which I think is just a dumpster fire in every way. I mean, if you're going to look at states and say, hey, who do we want to model ourselves after? I don't think there's anything that California does that I want to say, hey, let's go be like them, and not to say that we don't have our challenges in New Mexico, and a bunch of people are saying, hey, let's go follow New Mexico. But unfortunately, the government has said, when it comes to these zero emissions vehicles, you either adopt the California rule or you stick with the federal standard. There's no come up with your own plan, which in my personal opinion, I wish we could, because I think we could be a real progressive leader in this. But, the whole key to this whole thing is being economically reasonable, right? And the people that are crafting this and looking at it, we're so far away from this being able to actually take place and work. And I wish we could come up with our own plan with a totally different structure. I think every state probably wishes they could, because California is really not comparable to any other state. So, we have some definite concerns about this, and I'll preface, I guess it's not prefacing it since I'm saying it at the end, but we support the change to these zero emissions vehicles. We know it's part of the future. We know it's coming. We have spent tons of money on our facilities getting ready for this, already done a bunch of stuff. We've trained our people. We're committed. Our OEMs are committed, and we understand that it's a huge part of the future, and we're in, and so are every car dealer that is going to sell these things is in, and there's a huge financial investment in there. We want to be part of the solution. We're not against zero emissions cars. I'm not against zero emissions cars. I'm not speaking for every auto dealer out there, but our family, we strongly support this, and we understand that it's part of the future. But we're doing too much too fast here in New Mexico, and we just need to slow down and take a look at what we can reasonably achieve and what's technically practicable here. There's just way too many moving parts for a state like New Mexico that we just can't get done in this time frame.
So before I ask you any other questions, what's an OEM?
Original equipment
Okay.
manufacturer. So in the car world, we call them OEMs. That's Toyota, Honda,
Okay.
Subaru, whatever. And then there's also OEMs in the supplier world. So it's a rich.
Sure.
So I should say manufacturer, just so people understand easier. But it's it's used in the tool world and lots of things. So it's original equipment. So as opposed to a standalone used car lot or
Right.
a CarMax or something like that, they're not OEM because they're not franchised.
So I'm going to ask you a specific question about your dealerships because, well, first and foremost, I will say that while the state does not have any tax credits specifically for EVs currently, the governor has signaled that she's going to try to do that in the next legislative session. So, okay, the federal government has subsidized, I want to say up to $7,000 is the
Yeah, but
credit.
it's up to only a certain price limit, and there
Right.
are very few cars that qualify for that.
Okay. Fair enough.
And most of the EVs that are sold are much more expensive.
Right. That's
I,
good to
I
know.
know I know they're going to get cheaper, but that just proves my point. Hey, if they're going to continue to get cheaper and there's going to be price parity where someone can choose an internal combustion car or an EV car and it's basically the same price with incentives, then hey, people have a choice. But right now, the people that are buying these things, if you look at the average Tesla owner, they're 87% white. They have the highest number of people with advanced degrees. They're homeowners. They have a average a household income over $130,000. Who These are not New Mexicans that I know or that I deal with.
Right.
It just and so there's so many articles out there now that I'd be happy to send you and you can put them online for your followers. But the people that are buying these cars, I believe the majority of people that have electric cars or want them, they've bought them already, and those people are rich.
Hmm.
And they're in New Mexico. Our fight, it's on these EVs. It's the rich versus everybody else. But you look at these cars; they're super expensive, and you look at the prices of them. And now there's just article after article. The front page of the Wall Street Journal again today was Ford cuts again because there's no EV demand and the cars are just sitting. But they're very expensive, and so they're just not really a relevant purchase comparison for people right now.
Well, I want to talk a lot about that, but first and foremost,
What
where?
was the question again? I didn't even answer it. Ask me that again because I had something I wanted
Oh,
to say.
uh, I don't know. We'll
You
just move on to. Well, I'm sure we'll come back to it.
okay? That's my fault.
Where do your buyers come from here in Albuquerque? Obviously, if there is a place that is EV friendly in New Mexico, it's Albuquerque because a lot of people can drive to just about everything they need right here in the metro area. But I got to imagine that folks from Roswell or Clovis or Silver City uh, come to Albuquerque, come to your dealerships to buy cars. But so break that down just a little bit for us.
Just in what we're doing now.
Where do people come from to buy your cars,
Well,
broadly speaking?
our big thing in our business is we try to take care of our own backyard. You're not going to see us advertising in every corner of the state trying to steal Honda deals from smaller town dealers. We don't even have enough cars in our dealerships to take care of our. So in the car business, it's called a PMA, so primary market area. So for us, it's some part of Albuquerque and Bernalillo County, and then obviously in Santa Fe and northern New Mexico. We don't even have enough cars to take care of our consumer base here. Last month our Honda store sold down to 0 cars 3 times, which is
Wow.
it's unbelievable. I mean, that's in a typical time we'd have several hundred new cars, and that's a post-COVID supply chain
Right.
thing, which is a whole other topic that actually
But related.
it's related, but we don't even have the cars there. So our average buyer, typical buyer, more of our customers are women than men. And our people do come from Albuquerque and Bernalillo County. We don't sell a ton of stuff out of town. We do with some of our boutique brands where we're the only dealer in the state, or there's only a couple of them, but most of our buyers are from New Mexico. And our average sale at our Honda dealership, for example, last month was $35,000 for a car. There's not a decent EV for $35,000. So that's kind of what we do. And ours is we want to be able to offer something to everybody, but the bulk of our customers are they finance their cars, they lease their cars. We don't have a ton of people coming in and stroking checks. And so that's kind of our typical buyer.
So okay, that's good to know. I not that familiar with the car selling industry and how that strategy can be differently applied across New Mexico. I kind of figure that some people went from smaller towns and came to Albuquerque. I'm sure they do, but
Yeah,
it
they
may not
do.
be a
But our thing, and now, in the old days, when there you didn't have the internet and things like that, and there's a dealership in a small town where we're selling 10 times the volume they are, and we have a bunch of selection. Yeah, we're gonna sell them to Roswell or Las Cruces, Alamogordo, Farmington, something like that, just based on selection. But now those people and especially post COVID, people are a little more willing to order a car and wait for it to come in and buy from their local dealer, and that's what we encourage. I mean, we think people should buy where they're going to service. We really encourage them to buy in state no matter what, and not go buy out of state. But when people call us from out of town, and maybe our price is $50 higher or $50 less, and there's people that'll still be there and want to grind for that $50. You don't see them as much, but that was the business I grew up in, was price shoppers, and people would go up and down Lomas and price their trade, and they'd call every dealer, and that's really kind of gone away, especially in import brands. I think it still probably happens in domestic a little bit more, just because there's so many more dealers, but the business has changed a lot in that way.
okay. Fair enough. So, I in terms of electric vehicles, you're not a Tesla dealer. Tesla is a unique animal, and you kind of it said some things implied about what Tesla does and how they operate, which is kind of different. They don't really have straight dealers. But uh, if I were to go onto one of your lots or another lot, you don't sell Ford, for example. What kind of selection are there in terms of EVs right now?
Yeah.
Are you backed up in terms of having too many of them? Because you mentioned that's an issue. Um, and I don't want to throw you under the bus in terms of your business model. You got the last one on the lot, but anyway, I what kind of selection is there in terms of EVs currently, and are you selling as many as you need to, or are they just not that popular?
Yeah. So that's, I think, the biggest misnomer in all of this, right? People just don't want them. The
Okay.
demand for them nationally has cooled tremendously. Locally, everything we sell that's electric is readily available, right? And that's everything from a Subaru to a Mercedes, Volkswagen. Uh, you mentioned Ford. I know the Ford dealers really well. Everybody has plenty of EVs. One of our Albuquerque city councilors wrote an editorial a couple of weeks ago that said, "Oh, well, the Ford Lightning sold out and you can't get them." Well, that was in the beginning of 2022. You can get a Ford Lightning now anywhere at a steep discount. So, the thing is, I think with Tesla and as a conventional franchise dealer, I don't like how they do business without a dealer license in New Mexico. They found a way to get around it by operating on the pueblos, and a lot of people don't know that they don't have consumer protection on the pueblos. If you have a problem with your car or a problem with a car dealer, people go to the attorney general. Well, you buy one at Santa Clara or Santa Ana, you can't do anything, and the taxes aren't collected properly there. It's another topic, but
Mhm.
for us, the they're readily available. And what I say is, let's just use common sense. We know how smart Elon Musk is, whether you like him or not. But in my lifetime, I've never heard of, and I've been in the business my entire life, I've never heard of a manufacturer dropping the window sticker price on a car ever. And so usually what happens when you have a slow moving unit, the manufacturer will offer incentives like a special financing rate or dealer cash or customer cash, and then that lowers the price. Well, Elon drops the actual price of the car. And so year to date, he's dropped the price of these cars over 20%, which is an average of $15,000 a car. That's unbelievable. But he's not dropping them because people want to buy the cars. He's dropping the prices because he can't sell them. So he's dropped the price. Tesla's dropped their price so much because there's no demand and they're losing market share even with those drastic price drops. So to me, that's a pump the brakes moment. Hold
Mm-hmm.
on. The undoubted market leader in EVs is Tesla, and they're outselling Mercedes and BMW in the United States. And they're saying, hold on, that should probably give you an idea of what the demand's like for EVs. They're all readily available. There's nothing you can't get.
Well, that's good to know. And you know, the car dealers, and I want to emphasize this: the car dealers really are the tip of the spear here, based on the way the regulations are written. You know, if I, as a consumer, don't buy an EV, at least as it stands, as written, there could be a time where a future governor does something to really force my hand as a consumer. There could be a time when manufacturers are limited, but it's right now about selling the vehicles in the state of New Mexico. So, as a consumer, if this 43% goes through, sorry, Garcia, I want a vehicle that fits my needs. I'm going to go over to Amarillo or to Lubbock or some El
Yeah.
Paso. Texas is obviously the easiest one for us, but Arizona as well. Uh, Talk about why this is such an existential threat for your particular industry.
Well, that's a major concern that people can go to these other states that are, we call them, non-ZEV states or non-carb states, that California Air Resource Board, whatever you
Yep.
want to call them. They go to these states that follow the federal standard. They can go buy a regular gas or diesel car, an internal combustion engine car. And really the dealers, I think, where, mind you, we employ thousands of New Mexicans in our dealerships. It's not just us, it's a lot of dealers, and it's all of our suppliers, supply chain, all the way down, independent repair shops. There's just so many businesses that rely on the franchise automobile dealer business in New
Not to
Mexico.
mention the taxes you pay and the community kind of
Yeah.
beneficial groups,
Yeah.
charities, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And so, you look at the excise tax collected on automobiles, it's a huge machine. And so really where the dealers are at the mercy of the mandate and then the manufacturers, right? So we don't know what the manufacturers are going to say when, if this passes and we send them a letter on January 1st saying 43% of the new car production that you have has to come to New Mexico by 2027 has to be EVs. I mean, you add up all of our line makes here in New Mexico, the cars that we sell, we don't, by brand, add up all the Toyotas sold, all the Hondas, we don't even equal the size of one big dealership in Phoenix. So, my fear is, well, hold on a second. You guys are telling us we have to build 43% EVs, but New Mexico sells, 60,000 new cars. And I think the number they used, I think was 66,000 in their projection, which is fine. I'm not going to argue with that. But wait, we sell, X amount of hundreds of thousands of cars or millions of cars across the country. In New Mexico, we sell 2,000 or 3,000. Why are we going to mess with it to get pushed around by you guys? You're just too small, right? And so they're going to use their resources, because California is such a huge state for them for their overall business. That's where they're going to focus all their money in trying to get these EV credits. It's not going to be here. So you have that problem. And then you have just the real production problem, right? So I use Honda, which is a fair example because everybody knows Honda. We can all agree they're a major manufacturer, but Honda's going to sell 1.2 million cars next year, okay? Their first year production run for their electric vehicle is 70,000 cars. That's 5.8% of their production. That's nowhere near 43%. And there's also no guarantee that those are all going to sell. So how is a company like Honda, which we can all agree is a well-run company, and largely Honda's an American company. I mean, they've been building cars in America. Hondas are more American than the American brands. You
Mm-hmm.
look at the real numbers and the plants where Hondas are built. It's a very American company, non-unionized, by the way. You look at those numbers. Well, how could they possibly get to 43%? They can't. You look at Toyota, the global leader. They're nowhere. going to be nowhere near that, right? And there's a lot of press. The former president of Toyota, whose grandfather founded the company, was, in the Wall Street Journal last week talking about this. So just the math just doesn't work for production. So dealers, we lose on the mandate side and we lose on the production side from the OEMs, and so we're really in the middle. And then we lose on the customer side because we're not being able to offer them what they want to buy. So we lose on all three ends. And so, I know people, feel sorry for the car dealers, right? But in reality, it's not just feel sorry for the car dealers, it's feel sorry for all of our employees, all of our customers, all New Mexicans, because this thing is so drastic.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's not going to be the supply. I mean, yes, as much as the manufacturers have ramped up, and if you watch like the Super Bowl or some other big advertising event, you would think that the only vehicles being produced by these car dealers or car companies are EVs because of the amount of advertising that's going on. But in reality, there's still a relatively small portion of what the manufacturers offer, and we're going to be implementing this alongside California, which I always tell people 1 out of every 8 Americans lives in the state of California.
Yeah.
So New Mexico is like the pimple on the back of the bull, and the California is the bull. And where are those cars going to flow to? Not New Mexico. It's going to go to California.
Yeah, and they've got 40 million people and we've got 2, or they've got 39 and we've got 2. I mean, something like that. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, and it's not feasible for anybody, and there's no way to achieve these numbers. And like you mentioned when we were talking, the fact that the 2 boards that are voting on this are, they're all appointed folks, and if you look at their resumes, I think 11 out of the 13, their income comes from environmental based causes or grants or programs. I mean, how are those people supposed to be objective? Because they're just 100% concerned on tailpipe emissions, which I get. I understand that, but how can we let these people decide our future, that obviously stand to benefit from something like this going through? I mean, I have a real problem with that personally, and you need multiple perspectives on something this huge, and we need something that's reasonable.
So I'll ask this bluntly. You're part of a major business in New Mexico, certainly by New Mexico standards. Uh, this governor is somebody who we have pretty much never seen eye to eye with from day one on a wide variety of issues. So she's not calling me, I'm not calling her. Have you or members of your family or kind of your business or even the Auto Dealers Association had conversations about these issues with the governor and told her that this is just not realistic? And if so, what kind of reaction has she had?
So I like the governor. I consider her a friend. There's obviously, you're not going to see eye to eye with any politician on anything. I'm not an overly political person. No one in my family is either. The governor's office has been receptive to meeting with us, and we've expressed our concerns, and they were definitely willing to listen. The auto dealers had a meeting with the governor regarding this, and I think it's gonna take something more in depth, like these hearings, where all the issues can get out on the table on both sides. And the bottom line is, whether we have great points that show why this isn't the right thing for New Mexico to do. I don't think they've gone so far and they're trying to rush this through to get it through in January. Even if we had brought the best possible case to the governor a couple months ago, I don't think that she would have changed her mind on it no matter what. So, I've always found her to be reasonable whenever I've talked to her about anything, or, my brothers talked to her about anything. And I think the hearings will probably bring out more information for everybody on both sides. But, I think it's hard when people take a real hard, especially politicians, when they take a real hard stance on something and they dig their heels in. And, like you mentioned, I remember what it was now. So when you talked about the governor talking about these incentives, well, I spoke on a panel at that at the
Just to be clear, we're talking about tax credits
tax. Yeah,
coming possibly as part of a tax bill in the next
right,
session.
right. But let's be realistic here, right? It would be foolish to speculate what's going to happen with EV production and demand. It's also foolish to speculate what the legislature is going to do or not do because a couple weeks ago when I spoke at that EVs or Future of Transportation symposium, the governor got on right after my panel and said, "I promise huge incentives." Well, okay, but that still has to go through the legislature. Those are still a ways away. That's not helping anybody in the immediate future, and it's not a guarantee. So, as I understand it, and I haven't checked this, but I think she vetoed two different packages that had EV incentives the last couple years, is what I was told. So,
Certainly in the last session, she
okay,
did.
so if we can agree on that, and I don't know what was in the entire bill or anything like that, but if we thought it was so important and thought it was coming, we probably, with every other state that's going to ACC2 has state incentives, right? Why wouldn't we put something in the package if we knew that this is the way that we were going to go? And so I think it's just pure speculation to think that the legislature, and it has to be huge incentives, right? Because California is already rolling back their incentives. This was a huge article that I saw last week. So their incentives now are for high wage earners. When that budget runs out, they're going to focus on trying to get lower income people to buy EVs. California is changing that, right? Because they feel like all the rich people have already bought those expensive EVs. Well, in New Mexico, we would have to go to do the same thing. We'd have to go income based to try to spread these incentives out evenly and fairly. So, in my opinion, that's $15,000 to $20,000 a car. 43% is 60,000. How many hundreds of millions is this going to cost us, right? Plus, we lose the gas tax, which I think is a huge issue that no one wants to bring up. And our gas is too cheap here, right? I'm probably not going to get a lot of fans for saying that, but I think our gas tax is 18 or 19 cents a gallon here. California, I think it's 63%. But that's how our roads are built and maintained, and we lose. We're going to lose all that gas tax revenue. These cars are twice as heavy as gas cars. They do so much more damage to the roads. Our parking garages can't hold them. These are all things that nobody talked about or thought about. And I blame California for that. There's too many things in there that are unintended consequences. Okay, we're going to say 43%, but we're not talking about any other thing. And maybe their plan does work in California, but their infrastructure head start, the money they have, the way that they can spend their way out of any problem is just not something that we can do here. There's just way too many logistical challenges, and it's just not in the public interest here that this thing be carried through.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and we are rapidly approaching the end of the time we have together here. I will go ahead and say that we have keepyourcarsinm.com. Everybody who listens to this show, whether it's on the radio, on the podcast, watches it, keepyourcarsinm.com. We need all hands on deck. Go to that website. Make sure that the Environmental Improvement Board knows that an overwhelming number of New Mexicans oppose this policy. It's deeply troubling that this is going through an unelected board, not the legislature. The legislature's had a lot of opportunities, not on the subsidy side, although they passed a subsidy for EVs last time, but on doing things like the clean fuel standard and others that the governor said she supported on changes to supposedly make cars cleaner. So it's frightening that this is all being done with an unelected body.
Yeah, and the people, every New Mexican stands to lose on this thing, and it's going to affect the lower income earners worse than anybody else. And we look at renters. You're going to go tell the guy that you rent your house from, or the gal that you rent your house from, or your apartment building owner, hey, you need to put an EV charger in here. That's a whole other topic about how our building code's going to change, and I'm sure you.
Yep, we've talked about that, and that's not going to impact directly your industry, but it's a huge imposition on the developers. Obviously, I'm sure the governor, all ironically with the oil and gas money that's flown in here, that she will be able to subsidize some of those. But Yeah, up to 20% of the parking spots in an apartment complex or a commercial real estate development
But
being
what that
electric.
is going to do, though, is if in the existing ones, right? If people think that they're going to be told to buy an electric car, they don't have a charger. What are they going to do? They're going to keep their old, higher polluting car longer,
Yep.
right? Which is going to wipe out the gains by the EVs, or they're going to go out of state and buy a car. There's nothing that stops them from going to buy a used car out of state that's going to be internal combustion or diesel or anything. So you have all this unintended consequence that's just going to add to pollution that nobody wants to talk about. If that's what we're really concerned about is pollution, right? Where, as I see it, and on the EPA website it says Albuquerque and Bernalillo County doesn't have a clean air problem, right? Since 1996, we've met the federal standard for clean air in Albuquerque and Bernalillo County. We have a great emissions testing program here. It works. The people that run that program are awesome. We've spent as dealers millions of dollars on emissions equipment, testing equipment, and training for people. We have a great program, and we have clean air, right? So, what is this really about?
Yeah.
Is it about clean air? Is it about? And I understand in tailpipe emissions. Hey, like I said, I get it. It's gonna move that way, but let's move it at a plan that's achievable and reasonable, and that's not just punitive for everybody, including New Mexican taxpayers.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Anything you want to share with people besides having them contact the EIB at this point through the keepyourcarsnm.com website?
I think you've done a good job at that. You know, like I said, I'm not an overly political person. I'm not telling people what to think. I just want to put the facts out there of something that shows everybody that this isn't something that's economically reasonable for New Mexicans. And I think everybody needs to look at this and see what it's going to do and affect their lives and you know, make a decision for themselves.
All right. Well, Carlos Garcia, Garcia Automotive Group, thanks for doing business with us and so many New Mexicans over the years, and the cars that you've brought us to use in our day to day lives, as well as the jobs and the taxes and the sponsorships of all the different little leagues and soccer programs, et cetera, et cetera. And hopefully that continues long on into the future, regardless of what the governor's got in store for us on
I
this
hope so.
issue. So thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.